All right, welcome to the second half of H.G. Wells' God, the Invisible King. And thank you for your patience. We've had a lot of work to get done this week. So we'll have this tonight, and then probably tomorrow night I'll have part 2 of the Genesis Abraham talk where we cover Genesis 15. All right, so remind us where we are. We're on chapter 5, and what's he talking about now?
He is talking about the invisible king, what he thinks God is and what God is like. He says that modern religion is a political religion. So it's going to be some type of combination, religion and politics as well. And then he goes on again to describe that God is not old, God is a youth. And so what he's describing to me, it sounds like Apollo again. He says, the conception of a young and energetic God, an invisible prince growing in strength and wisdom, just like evolution is leading us to a better humanity. God is also evolving and growing because he's not in his final form yet.
Process philosophy, process theology is what this is called, yeah.
Yeah. So this, he says, involves a demand for complete revision and fresh orientation in the life of the convert. He says, God brings mankind not rest, but a sword. He concedes nothing to Caesar. In our philosophy, there are no human things that are gods and others that are Caesars. Those of the new thought cannot render unto God the things that are God, and to Caesar what are Caesar's. I don't know what he's saying. What is he saying?
I don't know. So he means that we don't pay taxes to the king anymore? Who do we pay taxes to?
Well, I guess it's an Illuminist philosophy that there's no authority but your own intellect and your own conscience.
Of course, he believes in a giant superstate, so
Yeah.
that makes no sense.
Yeah.
How is there no authority when he is a statist?
Yeah. And then, so this made me think again, so if it's an invisible king or if it's God and everything, there's no icon and there's no Christ, and we can't be made in God's image, right? Because we can't, he's
Because
invisible.
this is an invisible God who...
We Orthodox Christians have a visible God because we have...
Well, he's visible
Christ, the
and
icon.
invisible
Yeah.
because of Christ incarnate. But in this sense, yes, this is the unknowable, invisible God that can never be incarnate, right? So it's kind of like atheism, but his own kind of state version of atheism.
So he says, the steps of the altar of the God of youth are no safe place for the sacrilegious figure of a king who claims divine right and plays with the lightning, yeah. The new conceptions do not tolerate either kings or aristocracies or democracies. So this is Adam Weishaupt again.
So it is
Right.
Illuminist.
Yeah. But he says, I take sides against injustice, disorder, and against all those temporal kings, emperors, princes, landlords, and owners who set themselves up against God's rule and worship. So it's pretty... He even admits that the modern religiosity will seem arbitrary to the inquirer.
It is arbitrary.
Yeah. And then he goes on to say, it is possible to define the broad outlines of the attainment that this new religion seeks. It is the conquest of death. So just like...
So the Illuminists are seeking to overcome death through transhumanism.
Well, he doesn't know about that yet, but this is what would lead up to it.
Well, it's his circle that will coin the term.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Huxleys.
Okay.
He's in the circle of the Huxleys.
Okay. So he says, in the conquest of death, the first overcoming of death in the individual by the incorporation of the motives of his life into an undying purpose, and then the defeat of that death that seems to threaten our species upon a cooling planet beneath a cooling sun. So he's already talking about climate change.
Global cooling. Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, I covered him being a pioneer of climate change in either in Island of Dr. Moreau or The Time Machine, which we've covered. In one of the two, he pioneers this idea of blaming men for the climate. And actually, so did Bertrand Russell, who's also in the circles with him and the Huxleys. They're all kind of pioneering the same ideas. You're correct.
So then he's talking about the crucifix, and the worship of the God of youth is vaguer than Christianity. He says He who is called in this book God, they will call God the Son or Christ or the Logos, but what is here called the darkness or the veiled being, they would call God the Father, and what we speak of here as life, they would call with a certain disregard of the poor brutes that perish man. Does that make sense?
Kind of. Because he's hiding the Gnostics again.
Uh-huh.
These Gnostic groups. So yeah, I know what he means by that because he says it right here.
Okay. What is he saying?
He's saying that these terms, God the Father, the Logos, they don't mean what Orthodox Christianity means. They mean what the Gnostics mean by it.
Oh.
They give different meanings to all those terms.
Right.
And that's why over here he says that we don't believe that Jesus is God. Jesus is just another dude. He's just a guy, which is what the Arians and the Nestorians said.
Yeah.
And then here is the key of the whole book, I would say. I mean, I haven't read the book, but this looks to be the key right here.
Yeah, so he's going on to say, we do not presume to theorize about the nature of the veiled being, nor about the being's relations to God and life. Our God is, we feel, like Prometheus, a rebel. He is unfilial, and the accepted figure of Jesus, instinct with meek submission, is not in the tone of our worship. It is not by suffering that God conquers death, but by fighting.
Yeah, you should make a note of that page. I want actually to screenshot that and tweet that out because that's an amazing passage there.
Okay.
One of the founders of the modern world is essentially admitting that he's a Luciferian and that it's Prometheus that we want to follow here.
Yeah.
Lucifer.
Yeah. So he says the symbol of the crucifixion, the drooping, pain-drenched figure of Christ, the sorrowful cry to his Father, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? These things jar with our spirit. We cannot accept the Christian's crucifix or pray to a pitiful God. Right?
Yeah, blasphemous.
So, and then he goes on to say, God is courage beyond any conceivable suffering. We of the new faith repudiate the teaching of non-resistance. We are the militant followers and participators in a militant God.
So this will be a militant New Age religion that he's coming up with.
It's
yeah.
a crowned and conquering child.
Yeah,
My
right.
God of youth.
Right.
And militant. Submission is the remotest quality of all from their version of God. A Christianity which shows for its daily symbol Christ risen and trampling victoriously upon a broken cross would be far more in the spirit of our worship.
So this is Jesus, the militant revolutionary. Yeah. So
Yeah.
he's redefining Christianity to be militant Marxism, basically, because he's a Marxist.
So then he starts talking about the kingdom of this religion. The kingdom is to be a peaceful and coordinated activity of all mankind upon certain divine ends. These we conceive are first the maintenance of the racial life. What does that mean? What is he talking about?
He probably means the whole human race. I doubt he means any single race. I don't know what he means.
Okay. History and science are important. Art, philosophy, all of the arts and higher education stuff.
Right.
Belief in God, the invisible King, brings a conception of this coming kingdom of God on earth, and this is his utopian conception of the world.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not a theology of the afterlife, but a transfiguration of
The world
this
into
world into a theocracy of Luciferianism.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know it was this open, that he was this open about it. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, though, because he wrote The Open Conspiracy, and he wrote a book called The New World Order.
Yeah.
So he's open everywhere else. I don't know why I'm surprised he's open here.
So then
It's just that you don't expect him to say, yes, we're open Luciferians.
under the subject, what is my place in the kingdom, he says, modern religion admits of no facile flights from responsibility. It permits no headlong resort into the wilderness and sterile virtue. It counts the recluse who fasts among scorpions in a cave as no better than a deserter in hiding. So you have to be participator in this?
Okay.
Or what? Is that what he's saying?
I guess so.
Okay. And then here's something that made me think of communism. He said, the servant of God has no business with wealth or power except to use them immediately in the service of God. Finding these things in his hand, he is bound to administer them in the service of God.
Yeah, I mean, by God, he means submitting
The
to his
state.
system.
Yeah.
And he absolutely was a Marxist openly and a communist. Absolutely.
So he's saying, in the sight of God, no landlord has a right to his rent. No user has a right to his interest. So no private property? Is that what he's saying?
Correct.
Okay.
Ultimately, you are stewards of what you have, but you're not stewards in the sense of underneath God. You're stewards in the sense of serving his Luciferian order.
So then, under the section of the priest and the creed, he says, I have been interested to hear one distinguished canon deplore that they did not identify the Logos with the third, instead of the second person of the Trinity, and another distinguished Catholic apologist declare his indifference to the historical Jesus. Within most of the Christian communions, one may believe anything or nothing, provided only that one does not call to public and attention to one's eccentricity.
So he's saying that Christianity has devolved in the West to be modernist, and they don't even believe their basics, and it's just a bunch of kooks, is what he's saying.
Well, is he kind of right about that?
In his day, yeah, modernism was the rage in his time.
1917 is when this was.
Right.
Wow, this is old. More than 100 years old.
Right, that's when it was the rage to doubt the text. People were into higher criticism. These texts are all made up. All that stuff was the rage at this time.
So then he says, it is possible that the difference between Arminian and Calvinist is a difference of essential intellectual temperament rather than theoretical conviction. What does that mean? Who is the Arminian?
People who believed in free will as opposed to Calvinists who stress predestination. And so he's just saying that these theological squabbles don't matter. It's more so people's temperaments, and that it's a useless dispute, he's saying.
So then he talks about, he envisions the emancipation of mankind from obsolete theories and formulas, the whole world unified in religious sentiment, comprehending the same phrases and coming together regardless of class and race and quality.
Yeah. So here's the international socialism here.
The coming kingship of God must have this universality of appeal.
Yeah.
So
there will be interesting. He believes in theocracy, but it's not a theocracy like you would think. It's a theocracy of his own Luciferian deity that he's come up with.
So under the section about God and the love and status of women, he talks about relationships. He says that all the mystical relations of chastity, virginity, and the like with religion are not going to play a large part in the modern faith.
Right.
God is concerned by the health and fitness and vigor, but he has no special concern and no special preference or commandments regarding sexual things.
Sure, pee pee poo poo, do whatever you want. Do it all.
Yeah.
Right.
Be a furry.
Yeah.
Be a pedo.
God doesn't have any
whatever.
concern about any of that.
Yeah. It's all love, man. Right? Let's see. He's talking about sex is a secondary thing to religion and sexual status of no account in the presence of God. He is not particularly concerned about any aspect because he is concerned about every aspect. What does that mean?
Just
Gobbledygook.
gibberish.
Okay.
It's
Sometimes I
gibberish.
question my intelligence. Have I broke my brain, or is this doesn't make sense? I don't know. What does this say? Moderate. Let's see. Then he talks about. He says the sword must be sharp and clean. That does not mean we are perpetually to sharpen and clean it. Is he saying moderation in moderation? Is that some kind of...
I don't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, what a weirdo. Marriage is not going to be a sacramental thing.
Well, why even have marriage? Marriage is from Genesis. And if you don't believe Genesis, marriage isn't a thing. So, yeah.
He says, and from this comes the earnest desire to make marriage sacramental and the attempt to impose upon all the world the outward appearance, the restrictions, the pretense at least of such a sacramental union. So it's all a farce anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, he's very progressive here in this.
It does not follow that the mere ordinary coming together and pairing off of men and women is in itself divine or sacramental or anything of the sort. So sex is not sacred.
Has nothing to do, yeah.
Marriage doesn't matter. You can hump whatever you want to.
Right. So, yeah, he was way ahead of his time for sexual liberation, because this is 1917.
So then he starts talking about modern ideas of sin and damnation. So what is sin according to H.G. Wells' Luciferian philosophy? The nature of man. There is an interesting summary of the biological facts that bear upon and destroy the delusion that there is such a thing as individual perfection.
So that we're not really striving to some standard of perfection.
Which
that
would be
exist.
Christ. So you don't even worry about it?
Well, there's no perfect of any of these that he lists there.
Okay. There's no perfect diet, no perfect happiness, no perfect conduct. Any idea that there is a perfect man or a conceivable perfect man, he doesn't believe in. So he is not believing in Jesus, right?
Right.
It is in the nature of every man to fall short at every point from perfection. That's not biblical, is it?
Well, all of us sin and fall short, but he's saying that there is nobody who's actually perfect and we're never going to be made perfect.
Okay.
So there's no eschatology here for him.
Okay. He says, from the biological point of view, we are as individuals a series of involuntary tries on the part of an imperfect species toward an unknown end. So if you believe in evolution, it's just all trial and error and there's no sin because we're still here.
Yeah. We're just evolving. There's not a perfect example to try to strive to be. You're not made in the image of Christ.
So here's something I thought was weird. Did we get past the sin?
Well, you didn't say what's his view of damnation.
The world's already damned,
Oh, okay.
so it doesn't matter.
So this world is damned, therefore we got to try to fix it with the kingdom of God, which is his technocracy.
Is that a Gnostic idea?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
It says, satisfaction with existing things is damnation. It is surrender to limitation. It is acquiescence in disharmony. It is making peace with that enemy against whom God fights forever. So if you quit striving for evolving, then you're damned. Is that what you say?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you don't participate in the revolution. Yeah.
Okay. So this was so weird. He says, this is under the chapter, The Sins of the Insane. It says, it happens that the author carries on a correspondence with several lunatics in asylums. So H.G. Wells is having lots of crazy pen pals that are actually in asylums.
Okay.
And he says the writer is particularly accessible to this type of correspondence. So he did welcome people who are clinically insane to write him.
Okay.
And so he's talking about...
Why did he do this?
He doesn't say why.
Okay.
That's just something weird of his personality.
All right.
But he doesn't really see them as insane per se, like having no... I mean, they can still write letters and stuff, and he says they just have bouts of mania.
Okay.
They're sane except they live to a higher excitement and fall to a lower depression. And these extreme phases of mania and melancholy slip the leash of mental consistency.
Okay.
He says all the letter writers in confinement have convinced their fellow creatures by some extravagance they are a danger to themselves. But I guess he's saying, like, people can be crazy, but it's just like the amount of crazy, the
Yeah. So how does this fit into this book? Where's he going?
I don't know. He's just talking about the sins of the insane.
Right.
It is clear that the believer, that you can be insane and still believe in God. And he's just saying, like, you can take your mania and channel it
Uh-huh.
to serve God.
In the way he conceives it.
Yeah. And then he talks about believe and you are saved, and there's no such thing, like there's no sin that can damn you if you found God.
Okay.
He said there is no state that being regretted and repented of can stand between. So basically in this little part here, he's like, you can do anything, and as long as you repent, you're okay. It's a really weird way to think of it. Like, you can...
This is bizarre.
I know. You may kill, hang, rob, rape, but the moment you truly repent and sent yourself to such atonement and reparation is possible, and there remains no barrier between you and God. So,
Okay.
whatever, dude.
So it's antinomian. There's no standards in this religion.
Yeah. And then the last chapter before the big reveal of what he's talking about is called The Idea of a Church. And it's under the section called The World Dawn. And he just gives like a stupid Scully blog about, he's trying to be poetic about the new church.
Tell everybody what a Scully blog is.
It's like if you watch X-Files and Scully has these deep shower thoughts at the end or the beginning of an episode.
And she's typing her blog.
And it's
her
all
report.
really stupid.
Yeah.
Like, it's not deep.
Yeah, but
right?
she thinks it is.
Yeah. But he says, the deep stillness of the late night is broken by a stirring and the morning star of creedless faith.
That's Lucifer.
Yeah. And the last and brightest of the stars, the star that owes its light to the coming sun, is in the sky.
Venus, morning star. Yeah.
Men are beginning to speak of religion without the bluster of the Christian formula. This absolutist conception of God that has dominated the intelligence of Christendom, at least for many centuries, is coming to an end, and there's going to be a new thought taking form.
Right.
And the convergent religious movements...
So ecumenism.
Yeah. The whole world may be alive with this renascent faith. For emancipation from the Trinitarian formula and the decadence of Orthodox Christianity, minds have hitherto been hopelessly embarrassed by the choice between pseudo-Christian religion or denial. Participation with the kindred movements for release and for an intensification of the religious life that are going on outside the sphere of Christian tradition and influence altogether.
Well, yeah, and then he says we need Brahmanism and we need Hinduism to come into the West. And so he's saying that this is, again, right when the ecumenist movement was beginning to take a hold in the West, beginning to get some steam behind it. And here is one of the key guys behind that saying that a long time ago, saying that we need to import Far Eastern Hindu thought here on page 159 into the
Who
West.
is Rabindranath Tagore? Do you know who
It
that is?
says devotional poetry, so he's a poet.
A Brahmin
a
poet?
Hindu poet. Yeah.
Okay. So he's saying we overlook the religion of the East, but not so much anymore.
Yeah, because the Royal Society is who's going to help import, with money from the Rockefellers and other people, all this jibber jabber, New Age stuff into the West.
Mm-hmm. And guess what else besides New Age?
What?
Islam. Mm-hmm. Which he's talking about is undergoing a process of religion like Christianity. Revision. Tradition and medieval doctrines are being thrust aside in a similar way. Do you know who Nizam al-Mulk? Is that just
I don't know.
some Islamic theologian? Do you know who Eusebius
Yeah, Eusebius
is?
is the church historian. He's a famous early church historian.
Okay. So Eusebius and this Islamic guy, he's saying, would agree with each other. They would be in the closest sympathy against the temerity of the moderns. They would have common courtliness. He's saying it's not as barbaric as it has been.
Right, because the Trinity is confusing and we need a simple submission to God with Islam. And if we blend this idea of submission to God with Islam with the New Age Brahmin stuff, we can just come up with a syncretized ecumenist New World Order religion.
Yeah. So, yeah, Islam plus Brahmin becomes more and more plainly
Just cafeteria,
the same
just take
God.
all the cool things out of all the religions and make one up like Potato Head.
and he's saying it will turn all men about into one direction as the ships and houseboats swung round together in some great river with an uprush of the tide. New World Order religion, right? Let's see. This church has no need for special teachers or propaganda or any ritual observance. The Christian precedent is misleading. The church with its sacraments and its sacerdotalism is the disease of Christianity. There is no evidence that
That just means priesthood.
Christ tolerated either blood sacrifice or the mysteries of the priesthood. That's not true, right? There is no evidence that Christ tolerated either blood sacrifices or the mysteries of the priesthood.
Well, that's just a Protestant modernist higher critical assumption that those are later accretions, that Christ didn't institute bishops.
Oh. He calls these antique grossnesses and said that they're super added after his martyrdom.
Right.
So there's not...
It's just a typical Protestant critique.
He says, as men perceive and realize God, each will be disposed in his own fashion to call his neighbor's attention to what he sees. The necessary elements of religion could be written on a postcard. So, like, whatever you think is God, man, is God. Like,
Yeah, just boil it down to some simple things.
yeah. He's saying we do need to have an organized society, but not organized religion. The true God must be for their own sakes and not to take charge of religion. So this reminds me, what he's talking about is like, you know those guys who say, well, I go fishing every Sunday morning and I go be alone with God.
Yeah.
That's my church. Or my
With
church
God
is
in nature.
surfing. Or my church is
My church is nature.
Yeah. But not just that, it's like their hobby or their quiet time or their alone time. Like, that's not a church.
That's an
just,
idol.
Yeah. And so he's basically just saying, like, we don't need symbols. We don't need anniversaries. We don't need sacred ceremonies. We don't need any kind of...
Yeah.
Church.
Generic monotheism,
Yeah.
which is Luciferianism.
He says, let them express all that they desire to express in their own fashion by themselves or grouped with their friends as they will. Let them guard themselves against the idea that they can have God particularly or exclusively with them in any such undertaking. He calls altars idols.
Right.
He calls circumcision idols. He talks down about symbolical cannibalism.
There's something about the Lord's Supper.
Right. He doesn't understand a need for collective prayer. But this is so magnanimous of him, but there are people who appear to do so, and there's no reason why they should not assemble for that purpose. Well,
Okay.
Thanks very much. Like, do what you want, man, right? Total libertarian. And it just goes on and on. Like, well, he's just like, oh, he does like artistic expression of religion. He doesn't see why there shouldn't be cathedrals and art and music and
Right.
things that religious ideas inspire.
Right, and this is Auguste Comte. The state will create a civil religion for you, where you're allowed to do whatever you want within certain constraints.
And fraternities for research, science, association for teaching, language. But like he says,
It's under the Masonic God.
only when associations seek to control things of belief, to dictate formula, restrict religious activities, or the freedom of religious thought and teaching do they become antagonistic to the spirit of modern religion. The state is God's instrument.
See,
Yeah.
statist. Oh, we thought you were going to get a bunch of libertarian freedom, but actually you are under the control of the God state.
It's something we should see in every government, great and small, from the council of the world state that is presently coming, he says.
The world state, yeah.
Yeah. Coming down to the village assembly, the instrument of God's practical
The
control.
world government is the incarnation of God on earth. Exactly.
Religion, which is free, speaking freely through whom it will be the life and driving power of the whole organized world. So that if you prefer not to say that there will be no church, if you choose rather to declare that the world state is God's church, you may have it so if you will. So you don't have to participate in the religion if that's
Right.
right. He says the world is God's and he takes it, but he himself remains freedom, and we find our freedom in him. And that is his idea of a church. And then this last like epilogue was really interesting because it's just called The Envoy. And what he's saying is that he's not positing a theory. He's writing down what he sees happening already.
Yeah, action.
Yeah.
Marxists are all about praxis, not theory. They get mad at people who just sit around and theorize.
Yeah.
They think that's worthless. You have to actually go and be involved in practical action.
There's nothing in all of this that has been invented or constructed by the writer. I have been but scribe to the spirit of my generation. The ideas are developing, and thus I've written him down. The theogony here set forth is ancient. One can trace it appearing and disappearing and recurring in the mutilated records of many different schools of speculation, so like the Gnostics and the Luciferians.
It's generic theism. It's perennialism.
The conception of God is finite.
Illuminatingly in the recent years.
He said modern religion owes much of what is
He
called
cites
theism.
William James, of course, varieties of religious experience. Yeah.
Whereas God is a finite being of very special character.
That's interesting. Deism, theism.
Yeah. This is the very last page. The time is at hand when many of the organized Christian churches will be forced to define their positions, either in terms that will identify them with the Renaissance or that will lead to the release of their more liberal adherents. Modern religion has no revelation and no founder. It is the privilege and possession of no coterie or disciples or exponents.
Except for H.G. Wells in his book being the coterie disciple exponent of the new religion.
Yeah.
Which is
It needs no other guidance and no protection. It needs nothing but freedom, free speech, and honest statement. So he says it's like a butterfly in a chrysalis.
1776.
Yeah. It has no church, no teachers, no authority, no orthodoxy.
So it's nothing. It's believe whatever you want except believe what H.G. Wells says, and then he cites what Egyptian deities, right?
Yeah.
Nuhur.
A mountain of light.
Yeah.
It is an all-pervading...
What's a mountain? It's a pyramid.
Illuminati confirmed.
Yeah, it's a pyramid of light.
Yeah, that's it.
So, the world state's coming. It's not a religion with any rules, but you have to do what the world state says because it's God on earth. And the world state religion is Luciferianism.
Yep.
Literally. There you go. God the Invisible King. Thank you, Jamie, for this in-depth analysis of the 40th globalist book. And I don't know what we're going to do next, but tomorrow I'll have up for you guys the second part of the Abraham and circumcision, Genesis 15, 16, 17 talk. So thank you for that, and God bless everybody. I hope you are enlightened and understand that this plan is old, and even to the point of the specifics of the New Age and ecumenism and the religious elements being spelled out in 1917 by H.G. Wells 100 years ago. Later.